because they know how to work with an audience and seeing that in real time reaction from them. Now, when you put them on a virtual stage, right? Now there's so many logistics that you have to take into account.
Hello there, all of you event planning friends and future friends. Today is going to be a great episode. We have a phenomenal guest. For those of you who don't know her, she is an entrepreneur, a in demand public speaker, a live streamer since 2017, an author, and an NLP trainer. So give it up for Stephanie Liu. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so excited for this. I was like, I get to hang out with the Joe Floyd. My goodness, how blessed am I?
The feeling is mutual, I promise you. So let's kick it off with an easy question, if you don't mind. Can we discuss in 5 career moves or less how you became who you are today?
Oh, that's so interesting. Gosh, I would first say the very first career move was moving out of HR and into marketing. And I would say that that was probably the smartest decision that I made because when I was in HR, I still had a love for why people think and act the way that they do. But in order to actually test and see if you could change a person's behavior, was actually by leveraging marketing. Is there sales copy? Is there a website landing page that can motivate someone from viewing your business, your product, and your service, and then actually getting them into a conversion? So I would say like that was the first big move. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
And then I would say the second big move was moving away from PPC. So PPC is pay per click ads, right? And when you do PPC ads, it's really like when you Google something, it's the short copy that happens at the top and then you click, right? That was it. I did that a couple of years for like Adobe and Research in Motion and all these big tech brands. But it wasn't until I made the second career move into social media, because in social media, you get to learn so much about people. You think when you're scrolling through the news feed, you could learn so much about people's point of view, their values, belief, their attitudes, and the things that they say or the stories that they tell themselves, right?
Yeah.
So social media was so much fun because it wasn't just quantitative data as far as like, oh, how many clicks am I getting? But now it was more about qualitative data. So the mindset of people. So that was like the second big move. The third one was really getting into NLP training. And the reason why that was so powerful was because when I was working on the agency side, I was a part of the pitch team. And you already know this, but the pitch team, you have to know how to walk into a boardroom, be brilliant, right? Know how to ignite your ideas and really be able to sell them to a client so that way they're on board with you. So that was really cool from like a marketing perspective, going in and meeting client after client, prospect after prospect, and knowing how to pitch a service, but like hundreds of different ways because we all have different communication styles. The fourth piece was then finally deciding, hey, if I could do this for Nike, Sephora, and Clinique, I could sure as heck do it for myself because, as you know, that's when I discovered, hey, we're growing a family. So I wanted that freedom and that flexibility to build a business where I could still have this legacy that my husband and I were growing together. And so then that turned into live streaming. And live streaming was pretty much the combination of that entire background of knowing how to communicate your ideas easily and effortlessly, right? By leveraging NLP, being confident on demand, on camera, which most people back in 2017, and I still say even now, are still struggling with just being in the spotlight. And so those 5 career moves is really like, oh gosh, that's how Stephanie got to where she is today, really.
Awesome. Yeah, that's amazing. So, would you say that the combination of maybe your public speaking, which I've watched so many of them one day, hopefully in person, and your live streaming, do you think that's better prepared you for our current kind of lockdown situation and the massive shift towards digital and virtual events?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The interesting thing and you've probably faced this as well, is that most speakers that are used to speaking on stage know how to work the stage because they know how to work with an audience and seeing that in real time reaction from them. Now, when you put them on a virtual stage, right? Now there's so many logistics that you have to take into account. Like, yes, lighting does matter. Yes, audio does matter. And that built-in camera that you have, it's okay. But we've all been home watching Netflix and Hulu and all the things. And even just the quality of YouTube videos are a step above, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're a speaker and you have something like live streaming now you know how to better prepare yourself. Now you know that you can't just wait for someone in the audience to engage with you. You have to purposely say, like, well, what do you think? Right. And know in your mind that there's always going to be a delay. I feel like some people are like, what? It should be like FaceTime. And I'm like, no, 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 no. There's always going to be a little delay. So when you ask a question, wait for that engagement to come back. So I think that has definitely been very helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point. Engagement's always slower, and we know that because we understand what those pauses are. So, would you say what would you say maybe are your top five tips that you end up giving guests on your live streams?
Oh, aside from like logistics or more on an NLP basis, like where do you want to go?
I would say both because there's this machination of a lot of event planners are working with speakers who, like you said, they know how to work a stage, and then sometimes they kind of fall a little flat. It reminds me of this story. I'll share with you if you give me a moment. My wife recently bought me this vest, a weight vest for when we walk because let's face it, I've put on a few pounds while we've been COVIDing it. So this thing has 60 pounds on it. We're walking down the road 2.5 miles. I look down and I see this dime, this shiny dime that I could swear someone polished and placed there for me to find. I looked down and I said, Michelle, I don't think I can bend down with this vest and get that. Would you get that dime for me? And my wife looks at me and she goes, we've got on masks for COVID. We put on antiseptic, we put on all this stuff on our hands. We clean ourselves. When we go to the grocery store, we immediately go shower so that we don't risk getting COVID and getting our kids sick. But for 10 cents, because it's a shiny dime, you want me to bend down and put this in your pocket. And I kind of just looked at her and said, point taken. And I thought to myself, this is kind of what happens with a lot of event planners. We're caring about all these other details about how to take a online or an in-person event online, how to make the digital part work, how to conform to things that we don't understand, and we're doing a lot of great things. But then we get to that shiny dime, that person who is an in-person personality that we loved, and we have no reason to know that they don't have COVID or that they don't have whatever it is. Like what, so I think it's a combination because some of it's the technology and some of it's also, it's this box that we're in, right? Like, when you talk about NLP and you talk about how you frame for people and look at them, I think the two go hand in hand. So maybe a little of both.
So interesting. Yeah, I would say these days when it comes to events and even in talking to virtual planners, I always ask them, well, what's the run of show? Right? Because I want to know, where do you want to slot me in? Right? Because if I am the first thing in the morning, then you want to set the tone for your event, right? And so that tells me as a speaker, okay, is this going to be an inspirational talk, a motivational talk, or like do it now, right? If it's after lunch, then I know like the energy has to be there. And usually, if it's after lunch, it's helpful for me as a presenter to watch the previous people that had been on stage before me
Yeah.
because I could do like a callback, right? Maybe there was a message that the previous speaker used, and then I can weave that into my story as well. I think that's probably like next level. Most people don't do that. They probably like, I'm just only focusing on when I need to show up and I'll focus on that. And then the other piece is like, am I towards the end of the day? Right? Because the end of the day, it's the same thing. I want to do a callback for everyone else that was before me, still keep the same theme because mind you, again, if you're hiring a speaker, right, that's only going there to say like, okay, this is my talk. And that's the talk that I always do. And they don't fit it into your theme, you might lose that with your audience, right? So for someone that's like speaking towards the end of the day, things that I generally keep in mind is what's the theme, what has already been shared, and then what's the action that I want to leave them with, right?
Yeah.
Because all morning long or the day one could have all just been like, here are ideas. But towards the end of your conference, it's now like, now you have to take action. Now's the time to implement. Now's the time to book time on your calendar and do it. And so that's another level of energy that needs to be provided. And so in working with them, those are the usually the tips that I ask is like, okay, where do you see me fitting in? Or what's your run of show? Because some of them will just be like, oh, it's just going to be one person after one person. I'm like, yeah, but you might need an MC to carry that through, especially if you know that one speaker is like very monotone and you're like, you're going to have two monotone speakers back to back. You might want to break that up.
So true, so true. And I've been guilty of that myself. So that's a beautiful point. When you are looking at speakers, then what are kind of 3 to 5 things that if you were an event designer or event planner looking, what would you look for in those speakers, other
Yeah.
than the obvious? Do they have good internet? I mean,
Okay. This is actually something that's really important. The first one is really, do they know how to teach online, right? Because as we all know, there are different types of learners, right? You have your visual learner who wants to see slides, right? They want to
yeah,
see like, what's the roadmap? What's the project plan, right? So that's going to be helpful. Then you have your auditory learners where, they want to hang on to every single word. Then you have your kinesthetic learners where it's like they would like to download something or they want to do like a group exercise and break that out. And I think when you're thinking about speakers is to divvy up your speakers that way. Because if your entire conference is only visual presenters, they're going to be talking really, really fast. Some of them might not even want to be on camera because they just want to show you slide after slide after slide. That from an audience perspective, that might burn me out, right? Because I'm like, oh gosh, there's so much information that's being thrown at me. I can't take any action on it, right? So then now instead of inspiring your audience, you are overwhelming your audience. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. It really
Right?
does.
And then if you have only auditory speakers, which are usually like your keynote speakers. If you recall, like most of them don't usually have slides, they're usually on stage and they're just speaking and telling a story. Those are nice to have, but then also weigh in the fact that you might have audience members where they're like, I need something to write down. Like, I need like a cheat sheet or something to follow along. And so for your kinesthetic learners, having a speaker who says, I am coming to you with a visual presentation with stories that's going to captivate your audience and they get a downloadable workbook like, oh my gosh, give me that speaker, right? Like give me that speaker, because now audience members, attendees are like, wow, I got like the full package.
Yeah,
So I would definitely say keep that in mind when you're looking and hiring different speakers.
that's amazing. Yeah. So I think how do we frame? How do we use this frame to elicit those emotions, elicit what it is we're doing? I think that people don't understand what we normally subconsciously look at on stage when someone looks
Oh
up.
yeah.
They're thinking when you know, there are a lot of cues that are already lost because you're only looking at me from the shoulders up. So how can
Yeah.
we more effectively use, or can we look for speakers who will more effectively use those remaining cues?
Oh yeah. Okay. So this is actually this is so nerdy. I love talking about this. So in one of the workshops that I have for speakers, it's the art and science of being irresistible on camera. And it's not about like how to take the best selfie, but it's really like what you say, like how to use this frame. And so the first thing that I usually tell them is that like when you're on camera, wave hi, say hi. Because when you actually go into a meeting or when you go on stage, you usually say hi to everyone. And the thing about that is that when you show your hand, the open palm gesture is actually the universal sign of openness. So it's like, hi, I am not a threat. Okay. The reason why this is so important is because some speakers, not all, but some speakers, when they're on camera, they never move their hands. And so the entire time, what happens is that the amygdala gets triggered, and it's the fear part of the brain that goes, what is that person hiding? And so unconsciously, what your attendees, what your viewers are thinking to themselves are, what is that person hiding? Should I trust that person? And so when you show like the open palm gesture, like, hey, here's what I'm going to show you today, right? Here are 5 things that I want to share with you today. That's helpful as far as building rapport in a virtual environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense.
Yeah. The other one is the stage anchoring. And I think we talked about this when we were going through our own training ourselves, but speakers generally, if they've been trained to speak on stage or if they've gone through Toastmasters, things of that sort, generally what happens is that if you're talking about anything negative, you want to anchor it away from you, right? So you want to put it like off to the side because you don't want to anchor any negative feelings, frustrations, minor negative emotions on the speaker. But when you're talking about like excitement and expert level and just the elite, that's something that you want to anchor on yourself. And so for those of you that are listening, that's where you want to take your hands, your gestures, and you want to use them with purpose. And so you're using it with purpose and you're pointing to yourself or you're pointing to the future, right? But you know where you've anchored certain stories. Does that make sense?
It does. It's just fantastic.
it's it's always interesting to try to teach this over a podcast because you're like, I want to see it. And so
Yeah.
hopefully I helped you because I'm very much a visual communicator. Joan, you know this. I speak really, really fast. I have to purposely teach myself to pause, right? And enunciate. But when you are doing the stage anchoring, so anything that's negative is going to be away from you. So push it off to the side, or for me, it's going to be off to the right. Okay.
Yep.
And then anything in the future, it's going to be off to my left. Because when people are looking at you on camera, if you look at something that's before is usually on the left side of the screen and after is on the right side of the screen. So for a presenter, you want to put the future to your left because then your viewers are going to see the reverse of that, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes or yes.
Awesome. So, uh, if you were speaking with presenters, I think we kind of already went over this. The questions that you would ask them. It's just really, I find that it's really a different game.
Yeah.
We've worked with so many presenters over the last year. I think in 1 month alone, I worked with 140. And I have to tell you, it's incredible the presenters who I would have loved to have seen in person, who do magic tricks or whatever. But so they're used to having their whole body. And now they're using a camera on their laptop, and they can't really move away from it because they want to be able to see a response, or they can't see a response. So, are there certain questions that you would, kind of ask if you were an event planner looking for speakers? Maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah, usually as an event planner, because I have hosted the Leap into Live Streaming virtual summit, right? And for us, my co-organizer and I, we wanted to look for speakers that had different storytelling aspects. So to your point, you might have someone who is an auditory storyteller and is so great with like the metaphors, with the adjectives, and knows how to paint a picture by using gestures, right? Or you might actually have a speaker who is a video content creator. And when they're telling a story, they're showing B roll that explains it,
Yep.
right? And then you might actually have someone like that is the magician, right? And you're like, okay, so when you get to that part in your story of your presentation, do you have like an extra camera that you might switch to? Usually, as an event organizer, I want to know, okay, so what's your setup going to look like? How can I support you with that? In some cases, I've actually heard of event planners where they send an extra Logitech Brio, the 4K one, over to speakers. They're
Yeah.
like, hey, let's level up your presentation because if our attendees are spending, hundreds of dollars to attend this, we need to make sure that the quality is up there and we're willing to invest in you because we know that you're going to deliver it. And so we just want to make you shine even brighter. And that's when it's like, oh, game time, right? It's not a recorded presentation. It's like, oh, now this is a show.
Yeah. 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 And I think, that's where live streamers probably have such a tremendous advantage. You're used to watching that feed come through. Used to pausing and kind of doing a callback to something that came. And it just seems so tremendously important now that presenters learn to do some of that versus looking
Oh,
for
yeah.
audience feedback that's not there, right? Depending on the
Yeah.
platform. So
You know
yeah,
what I would add to, just as an event organizer, is I love it when speakers show up not only for their sessions, but for other people's sessions. Like these days, in these virtual summits that they do, they'll have like a networking hour, right? And I've been to a couple of those as a speaker, and I've heard the event organizers are like, man, I wish more speakers would show up, right? It's because they think that they only have to be there at their allotted slot. And I think as an event organizer, you want to let them know that this is the whole entire experience that they're offering, right? Even at in-person events, it was always like, hey, speakers, we would love for you to show up at the networking party so that way you can meet the other speakers, right? Because that's
yeah,
the trade-off. You get to meet other people that are interested in the same topic. And then the second piece is that now we want you to go and network with attendees because they might have like VIP level memberships. And if I'm paying for the top tier pricing for this virtual summit, I want to meet the speakers. And so having that level of commitment where you have speakers that are willing to go above and beyond just their set, right? I think that's what's really going to make your virtual experience remarkable. And people will want to invite other people to like, oh my gosh, did you see what Joe Floyd did with his event? Like, oh my goodness, you have to you
yeah,
have to hire him because he adds all these different elements that I never even imagined.
yeah. That's such a good point. Tying that back in when my wife told me she wouldn't pick up that dime, she told me something else too. She goes, I thought about this before. And I was like, I am so shocked. I was flabbergasted when she called me out, and I felt a little blush. I won't lie about it at all. And then I got over it, and I said, so when did you think about it? And she says, well, there was a quarter in the parking lot a few weeks ago, and I thought to myself, I'm not catching COVID for a quarter. And then I thought to myself, I'm not even catching COVID for $1. And I looked at her and I was like, oh, so you've got a price. And she goes, but I thought to myself, if it's a 5, I'm going to put it in my pocket and let it wash in the washing machine and take my chances. And so, when I think about what you just told me, I so very much think about what she said. You have to kind of put those bumpers on it. You have to know your price. You have to know when it's worth it. But then you still need to put some kind of precautions in place and know what it is that you expect of speakers and let
Oh
them
yeah.
know as well. So I think that's a tremendous point. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. You gotta give your speakers what the expectations are. Because again, there are always those speakers where they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm speaking at." It's kind of like virtual conference bingo, where they're like, "Oh, I'm speaking at this event, ding ding ding," and they're just there to check it off their list, and their whole strategy is to post and ghost. I posted my session, and then they never show up. They don't do any of the pre-promotion. They don't engage with any of the attendees like that. That sucks, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like, man, I'm giving you this opportunity to be in front of my audience, right? And you, as the event planner, you have warmed up your audience. You have sold them through as far as like, this is how it's going to help you in your career or whatever it is that they want, right?
Yeah.
And when you have a speaker who's just only in it for themselves, that's when you're like, oh, goodness. Well, time to start like the speaker blacklist. And let me tell you, there is a speaker blacklist. It's started.
Oh, I'm glad to know I'm never going to be on there. Oh goodness. That's a tremendous point. So I guess thank you so much for all of the information you provided. But I do want to kind of end on this. It's a version of a question I've asked keynote speakers and mentors and people that I've really looked up to for over a decade now, and that is, what 3 books would you recommend? And specifically, are there 3 that you might recommend for event planners or speakers who are going into this digital kind of presentation mode?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many. The first one would be Captivate by Vanessa Edwards. So she's
I'm reading that right now.
yes,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, that's a good one. So in her book, she's all about like the science of people, right?
Yes.
And she teaches you about unconscious communication, things that we don't do, that we don't realize, right? Like standing on stage and putting your hand in a pocket that triggers the amygdala. So what is the virtual equivalent of that? That's never showing your hands on camera, right?
Yeah.
So Captivate by Vanessa Edwards is a good one, and I love. You're so studious. That's a really great book to have. The second one that I would highly recommend is Presenting Magically by Dr. Tad James, and that is when you get to the level of keynote speaker, knowing how to use your metaphors strategically throughout your entire presentation, weaving the NLP techniques within it, like the embedded commands, the suggestions, and just all the all the things, right? Like I get excited, right? That's another one of my books that I won't ever lend out. It's like you get your own copy. Like this is so good that you can have it. Um, the third book that I would say, I'm trying to look, I have like my shelf is over there. From a speaker perspective, ah, from a speaker perspective, let me think real quick. There's so many. I want to make the last one a good one. Can I walk over real quick and just grab it?
Sure.
Okay. It's like it's like the final countdown. Oh, this is going to be fun.
And while we wait for Stephanie, I want to let you all know that if you look down in the description below, there's a link. And that link will lead you to my Zoom checklist that I use for all Zoom meetings and webinars. So if you're doing a lot of these and you're always worried that you're going to forget something, I would highly recommend that you download that and use it every time you join a meeting.
Okay. Are you ready?
Number 3.
Number 3. This one, oh, this is such a good one. And it's so applicable. So it's magic words and language patterns.
I might have just read that one.
Do you see how many post-it notes I have on this? This is beautiful for storytellers. This is how to get your audience deeper and deeper into your story that all of a sudden they're suspended in time. They don't know how many minutes have already passed by because they're so deep into your story. Now, this book was originally for hypnotherapists, and it's all about like the hypnotist's essential guide to crafting irresistible suggestions. This can be used in a speaker setting. This could be used in an event planning setting. And so I find that when you script out your talk, I script out my talk, and I hope everyone else does, is that I script out my talk and I have to ask myself, am I using the charisma patterns? Am I using magic words and hypnotic language patterns to really pull my audience in? So those are the 3 books. That's a good one.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, thank you for those tips. Thank you for all the input and advice. Those are amazing books. I'm glad I have 2 out of 3 of them. I think I'll be picking up the 3rd one today.
Yeah.
Yeah, just thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your knowledge and for letting us know how we can all be better in the digital world.
Of course.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, audience, we will be back next Thursday and every Thursday. So look for the next episode. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you soon.